Tonight we continue our study of the book of Proverbs. I appreciate so much Brother Ken taking it on in rather short notice last week, as we had to be out of town for a funeral. And I'm sure you did well talking about wisdom versus foolishness or versus folly. And of course, that's the way, as I already mentioned, that we're going to do it each time, because the Proverbs are much too broad to go through verse by verse, chapter by chapter. We're going to take the topics that come from the book of Proverbs and group those together, which means we're going to jump all around the book of Proverbs, but we're going to stay topical in what those verses talk about. So we'll introduce tonight's topic and how it deals with wisdom in just a moment. Before we do, we're going to have prayer, and Brother Joe Taylor is going to lead us in that prayer. So let's bow.
Almighty God, we come to thee with humble hearts to give thee thanks for this opportunity to assemble on this midweek night to study thy word and to worship thee according to it. We're thankful, dear Heavenly Father, to be here and to have the opportunity to learn your word, that we may be able to teach others as we come into contact with them. We're thankful for all the classes that are meeting this evening, Heavenly Father. We pray your blessings upon each teacher and each student as they study and learn from your word. Pray your blessings upon Brother Steve this evening as he teaches us from the book of Proverbs. Maybe be able to learn from it, and that our wisdom would increase as well as our knowledge. I ask your blessings upon each one of us. May we be attentive to the lesson, that we may gain much. I ask you bless Brother Steve from his illness as he is suffering from sinus problems, and may he be able to impart the word to us with relief tonight. Forgive us, Heavenly Father, of our sins. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, let's see if you can guess what we're going to be talking about tonight. If I can make this work. There we go. Wisdom and what? Sloth. That's a three-toed Costa Rican sloth. And you're probably familiar with the movement of sloths. They live in trees. They don't come down much, because when they do, that's when the predators get them. So they try to stay up in the trees most of the time, but they move real slow. It's almost like a slow motion as they make their way through the trees. They're very sure-footed. They say sometimes hunters shoot them in certain parts of the world, and they don't even fall, because those sharp things are hooked around the limbs, and they still hang there even after they've been shot. But they move very, very slow. And that, of course, suggests to us our word sloth. And we have in our vocabulary slothful, slothfulness. And we have in the book of Proverbs, depending on what translation you have, the word sloth. We also have the word sluggard, or the more modern word, which is simply lazy. And all three of these suggesting the same thing. It's very interesting that the book of Proverbs has a great deal to say about slothfulness or sluggishness or laziness. I couldn't resist this next one either as we introduce our topic. You know the most slothful cartoon character around. You're lazy, Garfield. Garfield says, I happen to be conducting a scientific experiment, thank you. Lazy, lazy. I'm testing the first law of physics, he says. Lazy, 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 lazy. Garfield says bodies at rest tend to stay at rest. You've probably seen that commercial on television a few times about bodies at rest and bodies in motion. And of course, he's famous for it. I used to exercise, but I'm fine now. Garfield is known for his slothfulness, for being lazy. It goes with a great big appetite too. So it's hard to say which he's more famous for. But that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about slothfulness. We're talking about laziness. And of course, since we're talking about the book of Proverbs, which is a book of wisdom, we're talking about wisdom versus slothfulness. And so we'll get the counterpoint to that if time allows tonight. If not, we'll just talk about what the book has to say about slothfulness. But hopefully we'll get to the other part of that as well. So we call it the folly of slothfulness. Ken talked to you last week about wisdom and folly, or wisdom and foolishness, whichever way you want to say it. There's God's way and then there's man's way. One way leads to destruction, one way leads to a good relationship with God and a blessed life. So Solomon goes through here, and every once in a while he throws something in about slothfulness. And I was reminded of the old line, and Johnny Carson's the first one that I knew that used to say it. It may have been around before then, but the old joke line, I knew a man who was so lazy. And then what do you say to that? How lazy was he, right? Well, Solomon tells you he was so lazy that he wouldn't even cook the food he brought home after he hunted. I knew a man that was so lazy that even though he made the meal, he wouldn't even go to the trouble of bringing it up to his mouth from the bowl. Solomon talks about this guy that's so lazy, and he brings it to us in some pretty clear language here that we're going to look at. So we're going to go sort of through the book of Proverbs. I've got them up here. I encourage you to have Proverbs open there before you and read along. If your translation has some different words, feel free to share something like that as well, and that would be fine. Okay, first of all, Proverbs 6 through 11 is a rather lengthy, as far as the book of Proverbs go, discussion of slothfulness about the ant in particular. Go to the ant, you sluggard. And remember, you can put in slothful one, you can put in lazy fella, or whatever a lot of other synonyms you can put in there for sluggard every time you see that word. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, no overseer or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. Let's stop right there. The ant has more reasoning ability, or at least a more reasonable behavior than some people do. Now, some folks might say, well, the ant, it does it all by instinct. The ant doesn't really think about it. Well, I don't know how many of us have ever asked an ant what they're thinking when they do it, but the truth is they give us a good example. They know that in the summertime you get your food. If you don't, when the wintertime comes, you're going to starve to death. And Solomon says we ought to have at least that much judgment. We ought to look and say, there's a time to do things. We need to do things when the time is right. And if we do not, there are consequences. But the sluggard or the lazy person doesn't do that. We see one of the first features of the sluggard or the slothful person, and that is he doesn't begin things. Sometimes he just doesn't even get started on the things that need to be done, that will have severe consequences if he does not do them. Now let's keep going. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come upon you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. The ant is a self-starter. The ant doesn't have to have somebody, a king ant or a governor ant or a mayor ant or whatever, a ruler ant saying, here's what you need to do. The ants just work together because it's what needs to be done. And a sluggard could learn from that as they observe what's going on in the ant's life. And of course, realizing the consequences, as we've already mentioned. And so the sluggard, when are you going to wake up? When are you going to look and realize that some terrible consequences are going to come upon you if you do not do the things that need to be done? And we're not talking about somebody who sleeps here because they've worked hard all day long and their sleep is sweet, their sleep is pleasant, and they know tomorrow they're going to get up, they're going to be rested, they're going to go back to work again and do the things that need to be done. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a person who just enjoys that sleeping, enjoys that slumber, enjoys folding of the hands and just doing nothing. Kind of like our fictional Garfield. That's what we're talking about. Okay, moving ahead to chapter 10, here's how the sluggard is described. As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy man to those who send him. So we see here someone who has people working for them, has servants working for them, and send them to do a job. And what can you expect out of the lazy person? Maybe the job won't get started. Maybe it won't get done right. Maybe you won't carry it through to completion. The results are not going to be good. And so to that person, what's the sluggard like, the lazy person? Vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes. Now, we're all familiar pretty much with what smoke does to the eyes, right? It's a real irritant. What about vinegar to the teeth? Anybody ever drink any vinegar just to see what that was like? I guess not. Nobody seems to be bothered by that. Is that not an irritant as well? Does that not, what they say, set your teeth on edge? You know, straight vinegar? I've never tried it. I just take people's word for it. But it's an irritant. So this is to the person who has responsibilities, who has work to be done, and here's someone who he assigns a job. You go and do this. Go into my fields and work. Go into my vineyard and do this. Well, the lazy man is going to be an irritant because the results that are going to come from it are not what the owner, the one who sent the servant to do that, is really wanting. So he becomes an irritant, a lazy person. Moving forward, chapter 12, we're going to look at verse 24 and 27. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be put to forced labor. So what does that tell us? What point is he making there? It's one of those antithetical Hebrew parallelisms. You know, here's what will happen in this case. Here's the opposite will happen in this opposite case. What's the point? The diligent will do what? They'll be in charge. They'll be the ones who are seeing the things get done, and they'll be telling other people what to do. They'll be overseeing projects. What's going to happen to the lazy man? It could come down to forced labor. He could lose anything that he has, any kind of possessions. We'll talk more about that in a moment. He could lose what he has and wind up being somebody's, let's see, there's another word that some translations have there, under tribute. I think one. Anybody else have another translation that has a different word besides forced labor, a different phrase? But what it all amounts to, whether you call it under tribute or forced labor, is you're doing what somebody else tells you. You don't have any freedom. Your freedom is taken away from you. Somebody else is in charge. That's what can happen to the lazy man. The diligent man is one that's going to be taking care of things. The lazy man does not roast what he took in honey, but diligence is man's precious possession. Can you imagine someone that is so slothful that they might go out hunting, and you wonder how they even got out there in the first place? Why did they have that much trouble? But somehow they went out hunting, and they took an animal, and they brought it back, and they sat there and looked at it. It's just too much trouble to clean that thing and put it over the fire. That's too much trouble to get it ready. Too much labor, too much effort to put forth to cook that. And so what ought to be supper for him and his family, it's not. It's wasted. So not only does the slothful man sometimes not really begin things, but sometimes when he begins things, he just runs out of initiative. He doesn't follow them through. He doesn't carry on with what needs to be done. Now, what's going on in the mind of the slothful person, of the sluggard? Is there peace there, or what's the motive? What's the attitude? Do it tomorrow. That's right. But what's going on? Is he finding happiness? Is he happy in being slothful? Well, at least not part of the time. Solomon said, "The soul of a lazy man desires and has nothing." The counterpart, the soul of the diligent should be made rich. But we're focusing on the lazy man now. He desires. In other words, the lazy man can see that he's not getting what he wants, right? He's not getting the benefits that he would like to have. He's not going to have a meal if he doesn't clean it and cook it. He's not going to have a crop if he doesn't go out and plant it and take care of it. He's not going to have all these things that he desires. So it's really, we may sometimes think of a restless man, of a lazy man just laying back and just enjoying life and swinging in the hammock under the shade trees and thinking, well, everything's really good. I like not having to do anything. But what's really going on in his mind, he desires, but he doesn't have it. The fact that he doesn't work, put out any effort, doesn't change the fact that he wants these things and he does not get them because he's not working for them. So it's a restless, unsatisfied way of life that the sluggard, the slothful man has. All right, one more passage, and then we'll stop and see if you got any comments. This is one of the most vicious descriptions, I guess you'd say, of the lazy man. Proverbs 18:9. He who is slothful in his work is a brother to him who is a great destroyer. Now, some translations, I believe, say waster there, W-A-S-T-E-R, instead of destroyer, and that would be bad. But a lot of folks think probably destroyer is the better way of translating that word. So to say that he's a brother to something means that he's a lot like that. He does this and his brother does that. They're a lot alike. The slothful man in his work is like a destroyer. Now, think with me about how that could happen. How is the slothful man going to be destructive? And this is time to give us comments. Sarah? Okay. Sarah says a garden. You have a potential crop. You have something that's beautiful, that's productive, but if you don't take care of it because of slothfulness, the garden of this lazy man is going to be destroyed because the weeds will take over. What else about the slothful man? Okay, he's wasting or destroying the opportunities that he has to be productive. Other people? Destructive. Yeah. Okay, he's discouraging the people around him, isn't he? Have you ever been on a job? Don't hold up your hands for anything. You can go over this in your head, I'm sure. Have you ever been in a job, a work, a situation, whatever the atmosphere, but you were working with someone, and he really did, or she just really didn't care if she was there or he was there or not. Really not into it. Not going to do any more than they had to get by. Whatever reason brought them there, it wasn't the desire to do a full day's work or to do a job right. It just wasn't. They're slothful. How does that make you feel? Do you spend 100% of your time thinking about how much you want to do a good job? Do your thoughts never wander, beyond, well, I'm going to do what I want to do here. I'm going to do this good job, or is it hard not to think, I wish he or she would do what she's here to do. I wish he would get active with this. This is going to detract from what we're trying to do here. Even though I do my part, he or she's not doing their part. It's destructive of morale, isn't it? If we have a great deal of slothfulness around, it can destroy morale. Anything else? Okay, we'll go on then. But a lot of possibilities, because when the slothful is involved, nothing's going to get any better. Everything's going to just deteriorate. It is going to be that kind of destruction. All right. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. Well, that's pretty obvious, I think, from some of the other things we've already seen. The consequences, not having what you desire, of being hungry, of being cast into a deep sleep, maybe lulled into a deep sleep, maybe slowly reaching a situation where you realize, too late, I should have been active, I should have been productive, I should have been real serious about doing these things. And I just fell asleep on the job. Laziness has done that too. All right. Proverbs 19:24. Sometimes the lazy man just doesn't start things. Sometimes they just don't want to carry them through and do the steps that are necessary in completing them. Sometimes they've got everything there and they won't take that final step to get the good results that they want, that which they desire, as the other verse said. A lazy his hand in the bowl and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. Now, we can't hardly imagine that, can we? That's almost like a joke there. I know a man that was so lazy he wouldn't bring the food to his mouth when it was sitting right in front of him. That's almost a humorous image drawn up for us. Somebody could be that lazy. So Solomon is using expressive language here. He's using exaggeration. But sometimes it almost seems that way. A person might do so many things they need to do, but at some point become slothful, and there's the good results right in front of them, and they don't want to take that final step that they need because it's too much effort. And so they do not finish things. They do not get the results that they want to get. I heard a story about a fellow that went out to a bunch of fellows out. This was back when there were a lot of folks wandering up and down the railroad tracks, and gathered around a little fire at night and not doing very much and whatever. But he went out and he said, he announced to them, I've got $100 for the laziest man in this group. And every hand shot up except one. And one old fellow sitting there, and he just sort of pulled his hand out of his pocket kind of cash and said, put the $100 right there. He was so lazy, he wasn't even going to raise his hand. He wasn't going to actively pursue this. He was going to prove that he was the laziest person there by doing as little as he could to acknowledge that he was the one that ought to get that $100. Now, probably a made-up story. I don't know. But when I read that story, when I read that illustration, I thought, man, like the guy here with Solomon, won't go down and, his hand's right down there with the food. I can take a bite. But he doesn't bring it back up to his mouth to eat because of slothfulness, an extreme that's hard to imagine. The sluggard, the slothful man, is also a person who's real good with excuses. Have you ever known anybody like that you might think of as sometimes being a little bit slothful? And they always had the excuse. The lazy man will not plow because of winter. Oh, it's too cold in the winter. I don't get out there when it's cool. I'd rather plow in good weather. Well, that might not fit the seasonal and the planting patterns that you need to follow. He will beg during harvest and have nothing. Why? Because he did go out there and plow when he thought it was just not exactly conducive for plowing. You wanted just the right opportunity, just the right moment. And the lazy man is good with excuses. We'll notice some more here in some other Proverbs. But that was because it was just too hard. It's a little bit too cold. And some of the excuses get even more hilarious than that. Here's one in Proverbs 20 and verse 13. Do not love sleep, lest you come to poverty. Now, again, we're not talking about somebody who sleeps well and, and, and completely out of it because they worked hard during the day. Solomon's talking about the person who just says, man, this is the way to live. As little effort as possible and lay around and sleep all I want to. The results of that are coming to poverty, and Solomon's telling people that. He's telling as if he were telling it to his children first. He says, son, you don't want to like sleep too much. You want to like, a good, hard day's work, knowing what you're going to receive, because if you don't, it goes to poverty. Open your eyes and you will be satisfied with bread. Is there something about satisfaction and hard work? Do most of us feel that way? Is it satisfying to get the results for being productive at your job and whatever it is you do by means of support? Solomon says, open your eyes. Wake up. Don't lay in bed and think about all the things you'd like to have. Get up and do what other people who are able do, and go out and work for the day and be productive, and you'll be satisfied with bread. There'll be a special feeling that comes with that. And then we come back again, Proverbs 21, these two verses, to the idea of the sluggard being frustrated, of not being able to find satisfaction. And speaking sort of like modern language, has just turned into English here for us. The desire of the lazy man kills him. Don't we use that expression sometimes? Such and such is just killing me. Or what somebody's doing, that's just killing me. We're speaking in exaggerated language, but what we're meaning, it's causing us grief. And the desire of the lazy man is, I want to have what everybody else has. I want to have crops in the field that are growing well, and then a barn full of the harvest at the end of the year. And I want to have a vineyard that's producing. I want to have animals that are well taken care of, that are healthy, and provide me the things that I need to survive. I want all of that. I really want that. And if he doesn't have it, it bothers me. It's killing me. It's killing me. I don't have what my neighbor over here has. My neighbor over here. And the truth is, his hands refuse to labor. So there's no mystery why he doesn't have those things. But that doesn't keep him from being frustrated and being unsatisfied because of that. He covets greedily all day long, but the righteous gives and does not spare. Okay, there's the opposite again. That's what happens to the lazy person. Oh, I want it so badly, it's killing me. But he doesn't work to take care of it. The righteous, on the other hand, it works hard. He not only has that, but he does not spare, suggesting a generosity. And as I read that, I think about what Paul said to the Ephesians in Ephesians 4. Remember, he talked to them about not being slackards, about not being lazy or slothful. He says, let him who stole steal no longer, but let him labor, working with his hands what is good. Now notice that he might have something to give him who has need. Is there anything wrong, biblically speaking, with having more than just what we need to scrape by from day to day? Well, of course not. In fact, Paul said, you work hard and you're productive, and what can you do? You can help those people who were without, those people who have had difficult circumstances, those people who perhaps for a period of time or maybe an extended period of time can't take care of themselves. What do? Well, you make an honest living, you work hard with your hands, and then you have not only enough to take care of yourself and your family, but you're able to help other people too, to give to him who has need. That's a great Christian privilege that we have. So when I read this here about the righteous gives and does not spare, I thought about that kind of generosity of having enough to give to somebody else. Okay, and now a rather long one here, probably the longest story in the book of Psalms about the difference between uh, slothfulness and diligence. I went by the field of the lazy man, and by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding. And there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. When I saw it, I considered it well. I looked on it and received instruction. Solomon says, I learned something from this. You know, we learn a whole lot from observation. And Proverbs is full of that kind of observation. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. In other words, a little bit of laziness. So shall your poverty come like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. What had happened to this vineyard? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands. It did not receive the labor that it should have. It did not receive the attention because it belonged to somebody who was a little bit lazy, slothful, a sluggard. And Solomon says, you know, it's going to be bad results. Poverty is going to come on you like a prowler. Prowler comes on unexpected, and results are bad, like an armed man. That's what poverty and being in need and not having things were going to be like. Now, somebody might say, well, you know, how did the lazy man ever get there in the first place? What's a lazy man doing with a vineyard? Looked like he would be in such a position he would even have a vineyard or a farm or flocks or whatever. Well, what happened to the Jews' property back then? How did property get passed around? Okay, when the tribes, you know, they all have their land, you know, in the promised land, and each tribe has its assignment. People had their families had their property, and as B said, you know, even if you lost that property after so many years, it's supposed to be back to you. So a person could wind up with that because of an inheritance. You know, this is my family's land. But very quickly, they could go into debt and perhaps have to, you know, even sell that to pay their debts or something. And it would not be theirs for that period of time. So this is what it's a life lesson, an experience. Just look out there and you see, like Jesus told the parables. He said, look at this over here. It makes a lesson from it. Solomon says, well, look at the next vineyard you see that's overrun, not taken care of. And then guess what was the characteristic of the person who owns that land. There's a lesson there. That reminded me of Matthew 13, 24 and 25 because of sleeping and the results of that. Not necessarily the same. I don't know if these people here were sleeping irresponsibly or not, but here's what happened when you sleep. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. It's like any farmer would do back then or today. Good seed, looking forward to harvest. But while men slept, now back in those days, a lot of times workers slept out in the fields. You know, they get up early the next morning and start working again. They wouldn't go back to a house. They stay there close by. And so maybe they slept and they shouldn't. Maybe somebody should have been on guard. I don't know. Or maybe it's just a normal time to sleep. And while they were sleeping, no reason to expect it. The enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And just like that armed man coming, just like the prowler coming in surprise, that came as surprise. When the wheat started coming up, guess what was there among the wheat? Tares. Because somebody, for a short period of time, didn't pay attention, and the enemy came in and did something destructive. So whether these men were irresponsible or not, we still see the same results there. If we're not awake, we're not alert. If we're sleeping, these things can happen, and the enemy can sow bad seed. And of course, when we think of the enemies and bad seed, who do we think of as God's people? We think Satan, you know. So a good reason not to sleep, not necessarily physically so much, but that could be part of it, but also not to be attentive, not to be alert and watchful. for the things that could happen. All right, and this next one, I've liked this one since I was a young person. You know, the preacher used to read this, and I thought that is cool. The lazy man says, "There's a lion outside. I should be slain in the streets." And I'm thinking, well, was there or wasn't there? If there was, he had a good excuse. If he wasn't, why was he making it up? Well, it's another excuse, right? It was Solomon's way of saying sometimes these people who are lazy, slothful, sluggards, they just make up some reason. Well, there's a danger out there. It's not safe right now. And sometimes those excuses make just as much sense as saying, there's a lion outside. I'll be killed if I go outside to do whatever it is I ought to be doing. I'll just stay inside and take my nap. I'll be safe here from the lion. That was a ridiculous excuse. But we know that an excuse to the person who's using it to justify themselves doesn't have to make a whole lot of sense sometimes, does it, in order to satisfy them. You think of anybody in one of Jesus' parables? Matthew 25. I knew thou wast a hard man. Here's your one talent. Why? I was afraid. Okay? I was afraid. That's the parable of the 5, the 2, and the 1 talents. I was afraid, so here it is back. The master says, well, you could have at least invested it with the bankers. You could have done something with it to give me some return on it. Oh, I was afraid I might lose it. Here. It's kind of like the lazy man. There's a lion out in the streets. I might get killed if I go out there and try to work today. I better just stay inside. It was an excuse that didn't carry any weight. The slothful person, the sluggard, doesn't like challenges, even the idea of a little bit of risk. There's another parable here, or another proverb that I didn't write in here, but it's Proverbs 15:19, and it shows us that today, tomorrow, or all of life is basically how you're looking at it. And there's the contrast here. The way of the lazy man is like a hedge of thorns, but the way of the upright is a highway. What does the lazy man see when he looks out his window in the morning? Problems, challenges. You know, oh man, there's that whole field, and look at all those weeds. The upright man looks out and he sees, man, I can't wait to get that field all fixed up and the crop growing. It's going to look so nice. He sees a highway. The lazy man sees a hedge of thorns. Are hedge of thorns easy to get around? No, not really. So he's creating that barrier in his mind, helping him in his excuse. A hedge of thorns just as real to him as that lion is, or any other obstacle in his way. He sees those obstacles. But the upright man, the righteous man, it's a highway. You know, I can just go out there and walk to where I need to be, do what I need to do, and the Lord will bless me in doing it. That's the way the upright man thinks about it. Okay, one more as we talk about the lazy man. And again, it's very, another line, by the way, but it's very revealing of the personality of the lazy man. The lazy man says, there's a lion in the road. A fierce lion is in the streets. Solomon must have liked that. He used it twice. As the door turns on his hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. Now, can you get this funny image? Here's a guy that's turning over back and forth on his bed, just like he's on a set of hinges on a door. There he is, back and forth. When he ought to be productive, he ought to be up doing something. He's turning back and forth, just like opening and shutting a door on the hinges. That's the way Solomon draws him for us. So does the lazy man on his bed. The lazy man buries his hand in the bowl. It wearies him to bring it to his mouth. Solomon must have liked that one too. He used it twice. The lazy man is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. So, you know, you got 7 good buddies, and all 7 of them tell you, it's time to cut hay today. You know, it's not going to rain. Sun's out there. Great day to cut hay. He says, no, I can just tell by the wind, the way The way the clouds are moving, it's going to rain today. We don't want to cut hay today. You ever been with a bunch of farmers talking about whether or not to cut hay? Some of you have, haven't you? It's an interesting discussion. When I was a little boy, I just like to sit around and listen to the adults talk about, well, should we cut it today or not? What's the weather going to do? Because you didn't want to get the hay wet. Well, the lazy man can sit around. No, 7 people. No, let's do it. Let's go for it. You can do it. I just don't believe it's a good day for it. It's a good day to go back to bed and sleep back and forth, back and forth. That's what it's a good day for. So what we have here is the lazy man has, at least sometimes, he's got a pretty good self-image, doesn't he? At least in a sense. He's got enough confidence in himself that he convinces himself. He rationalizes enough so that here's 7 wise men who are hard workers, upright, and he can convince himself that he knows better than they do. So not really a good self-image, but he thinks he's got a good self-image, enough to have some confidence in himself and to reject their advice. And he's good at giving advice. This would suggest that as well. Have you ever seen anybody that wasn't real good taking care of their own affairs, but they could really give good advice to everybody else? They didn't really pay too much attention to their own affairs. If they had worried about their own situations as well as they worried about everybody else's, their own situation would be better, wouldn't it? Just put a little more labor into that, a little more attention there. But they're good with other people's. Maybe we've all known somebody like that. Well, this is a lazy man. I've got my life figured out, and I can give you some advice, he says. Well, let's summarize real quickly here because we're not going to get to talk about diligence too much, but diligence is the other side, obviously, of slothfulness, sluggardness, laziness. The other side is diligence. But let's summarize here. The sluggard is going to suffer because of his decision, because of his lack of doing what needs to be done. He's going to suffer. He's going to lose his independence. He's going to wind up being indebted to somebody and going to have to do what they say, which is not much fun for somebody who's lazy, is it? He is going to be frustrated. He's not really going to be happy. He's going to be restless. He's going to desire what he can't have because he's not working for it. And he's going to be an irritant to everybody around him because he's going to bring them down. He's going to be destructive. He's going to be like vinegar on the teeth and smoke in the eyes. So that's the folly of slothfulness. The wisdom of diligence. We're not anywhere close to done with this. Let me encourage you to turn over to the last proverb. Not now, but when you get home, you have time to do some Bible reading. Proverbs 31 and read 10 through 31. The virtuous woman. There's the wisdom of diligence, as well as several other places in the book of Proverbs, which we won't have time to go into tonight. We'll take another topic next Wednesday night, Lord willing, and we'll talk about wisdom versus something else that's not good. But Solomon's telling us about it because he's lived it. He's seen it, and he's giving us good advice. Appreciate your comments and your attention.